paradigm allows us to see certain patterns, but it blocks us from seeing other patterns. The paradigm that we've been using in catechesis has been a paradigm of thingifying everything. You want me to say that again? We have even thingified God. Sister Diane Jack, they of happy memory, used to say that. We have thingified it. We've made it into a thing. We even make God into a thing. We make the sacraments into things. These are sacred spaces for encountering the living God. So if we understand Eucharist or First Communion and Confirmation as mysterium, as sacred gateways into the encounter with God, portals through which our young people will enter through and experience something that is way beyond what they could experience on this stage of their journey, then we prepare them for sacred encounter by entering through this portal, through this mysterium, into the world of encounter where they come to a new relationship with Jesus Christ. Are you with me now? As opposed to that, what we tend to do is, no, we have to teach you these 20 lessons before you could get the thing. And when we teach you the 20 lessons, you could get the thing after that. Am I wrong? Huh? This is a paradigm shift, okay? This is a paradigm shift. The 20 lessons are supposed to be preparations for the young people to enter through the portal into the encounter with the divine. That's what it is for. It's not to get the thing. It is to open wide their hearts with deep expectation that when they come through the portal, they'll experience a world that is so big because of the encounter with Jesus Christ. You hearing me yet? You could say, ouch, it's all right. It's okay. I want to start by, I want you to really think this through. Because to me, this is a fundamental shift that we have to make. You'd notice I have approached what I am doing as mysterium and initiating you into the mysterium, into the sacred mystery. You notice that? Look at what we did yesterday. Each of the things, each of the steps I have taken yesterday was to help you to come to the sacred mystery, to touch it, to see it, to experience, to encounter it. From the beginning with Lectio Divina through all the exercises. This morning with meditation. To come to this sacred mystery and to the sense that the world is bigger. The world is bigger and more profound than anything that we would have known. The real truth of it, and the Desert Fathers, going back to Cassian, talked about staying awake as spirituality. The opposite is allowing your hearts to be coarsened by cares of the world, concerns, and debauchery. That's the opposite of staying awake. And staying awake to what? To the fact that God is present in every moment, and that the whole world is pregnant with God, waiting to bring forth God into every situation that exists. And we are the midwives of this birthing process. Miser Eckhart would have said, and he's one of the famous mystics of our tradition, Dominican. Miser would have said that what use is it that Christ was born 2,000 years ago if Christ is not being born today in your heart, in your life, in your encounters, and through all the things that you are involved in? If Christ is not being born there, what's the use of his birth 2,000 years ago? He's talking from the perspective of mysterium, the sacred mysteries, that we are to initiate people into. In the older traditions, we had all of these rites of passage. And one of the rites, all the rites of passage were initiation into the mysteries. And so the puberty rite was an initiation from boyhood to manhood, from girlhood to womanhood. And you carried people through the rites to the initiation into the mysteries. But we still call our coming to the church initiation, don't we? Don't we? But calling it initiation, we've lost the sense of the initiation into mystery. We've lost that sense of the mysterium, the sacred and the holy. And because we've lost the sense of the sacred and the holy, what we actually do is dumb down the process of the initiation into a process of mental exercises that people must go through so that they know certain content before we give them the thing. What does RCIA stand for? Rite of Christian. And what are we initiating them into? What are we initiating them into? If we don't know what we're initiating them into, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? So we bring people to the doctrine of the church, but we don't initiate people into the encounter with God. The initiation is to bring people into God. That's what it is. When we talk about the seamless garment of discipleship, that's what we're talking about. Initiating people into God. Discipleship is literally following the footsteps of Jesus Christ. Initiating people into the following of the footsteps. When the first two disciples came, sent by John the Baptist, and they said, Lord, where do you live? What he said to them? You know what we say to them? Well, first thing you have to understand is that God is three, but God is one. You get that? Okay, good. Now, you have to understand about Jesus Christ. The next thing you have to understand is, you with me yet? All Jesus said is, come and see, because when they come to see, he initiates them into the mystery of who God is. If we are not initiating our people into the mysterium, into the sacred mystery of who God is, brothers and sisters, what is catechesis? Is it another subject the children must be enduring? Is that what it is? So they spend their 2 years and then they graduate. And when you graduate from an institution, you don't come back. You graduate, so you leave. So when we set up catechesis as a thing and sacrament as a thing to be done, where the bishop come or the priest come and he do this for you, what we're setting up is our people to have a very poor understanding of what this incredible sacred tradition that we have is about. When we understand initiation is to initiation into God himself, and then the RCIA program is helping adults initiate into God, into this sacred mysterium, into this relationship that is a rock and foundation of their lives, then my whole approach is so different. Because it's not driven by content anymore. It's driven by cultivating the inner capacity of our people to enter into and experience this God. So that by the time the child comes to First Communion or Confirmation, the child comes with a deep expectation of the sacred mystery and being initiated into the sacred mystery. And the rite of confirmation then becomes a rite of passage through which they pass, from which they cannot return again, because they pass through this portal into the encounter with the living God. You hear me? You sure you hear me? This is a paradigm shift, okay? And it's an important shift to get, because everything that I'm doing is founded on this paradigm shift. That's why I have taken vocation. That's why we are proposing vocation as the framework for the AEC bishops, for for all of our pastoral life, together with with biblical animation. Why? Because both of these are the tools in our toolkit to help people understand that everything I do in my life is really as a response to the God who has called me. And if everything I do is a response to the God who has called me, then my living is coming from inside of me out, and not coming by checking off, well, I went to Mass, I say my rosary, I say my prayers, I do this, I do this, I do that. I's a good Catholic. Little Johnny went to church. He went every Sunday. Little Johnny went to hell for what he did on Monday. The divisions that we spoke about, or the disconnections that we spoke about yesterday between the idea of justice and living justice, the idea of community and living community, the idea of prayer and a commitment to action, these disconnects that we spoke about, these disconnects happen because our paradigm is an external paradigm. We try to change people from outside in. And you know, the truth is, there's only one person you could change. And even that is tough work. Even that one is tough work. And we go around with the illusion that we actually could change this body and that body. How many husbands and wives have the illusion that they go change their spouse? Eh? How many? How many? Until you give up eventually and realize in defeat, you can't change them. But who you can change is you. And you can become a better version of yourself by opening your heart more to the living God. Everybody good here? Okay. So if we use this Greek understanding of mysterium, sacred mystery, because at the heart of religion is really covenant. You know that? At the heart of our religion is really covenant. And what is a covenant? It's a sacred bond between us and God. At the heart of the Eucharist, when the priest raises the chalice and he says, well, this is a new and eternal covenant shed for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me. This is a sacred covenant. Another way of talking about mysterium. You know, the Bible is divided into two sections. Correct? What are they called? What's a testament? Huh? A witness. A legacy. When you know about your last will and testament. Yeah? Another way of talking about the Bible is the Old and the New Covenant. That's another way of speaking about it. The Old and the New Covenant. You see, the Bible is a covenant that God made with us. or successive covenants that God has made with us. And when we come to the last covenant and we say this is a new and eternal covenant or everlasting covenant. If it is new, it means they had an old. And if it is eternal, it means it will never be superseded. So this covenant, which is enshrined in the Eucharist, is a new covenant that will never be superseded. A covenant is a way of regulating relationships between us and God. That's what it is. And what we are bringing our people into is this covenant, which is this way of regulating relationships between us and God. This way of entering into a relationship with God where we understand what God has done for us through his death of his son, Jesus Christ. And therefore what we are to do, because we are now responding to the mystery of this incredible love that would allow God to give himself completely to us. And what we're initiating people into is the death of Christ. Paul says this all the time, the cross of Jesus Christ. Without the cross of Christ, there is no salvation. I will preach about the cross, Paul will say. For the Jews, it's ridiculous. For the Greeks, it's folly. But for us who believe, it is the power of salvation. Whether people ideologically on the left or on the right of Christianity, it is my impression that both of these sides miss this most important and most sacred understanding of what we are about as church. We aren't here to set rules for society. We aren't here to regulate morality. The church wasn't set up to impose standards for other people. We are here to initiate people into the sacred encounter with Jesus Christ. That's the core purpose of our church. Initiating people into this mystery. Because if we are initiated into the sacred mystery, guess what? We will live a moral life. We will share what we have with other people. We will be zealous for the kingdom of God. And we will work for a better world. And we will have stronger communities and stronger families. If we ask people through morality to have a better world, to share, to do this, do that, and do the next, it falls short because they don't have the inner dynamism that compels them to move in that direction. Where does the energy come from? The energy comes from being initiated into Christ. That's where the energy comes from. And without that initiation, you're asking people to drive the car with no gas. Or no engine, I suppose. Is this making sense, y'all? So, the role of the catechist is as an initiator. But you can't take people. Help me finish my sentence now. I can't remember how to end it. How you end the sentence? I can't remember. Sorry, I lose track there. You can't take people. How does it supposed to end? Oh, where you haven't gone yourself. Oh, sorry. Or where you don't want to go. Or where you don't want to go. And that is why the overarching theme today is vocation. You getting it yet? Because if we are not going to be true to our vocation, which comes from deep inside of us, then we're not going to be true to Christ, then we can't initiate anyone into Christ. I would like you from today onwards to see your role not as pouring information into heads of people, banking model, I want you to see your role as an initiator into the sacred mysteries. That's how I want you to see your role. That's your role in the church as a catechist. A catechist in the church is someone with a very special and sacred ministry. You do, because you are the connection between the church in her deepest and most profound self and the next generation living the faith. And if you don't see yourself as initiator of the uninitiated into the sacred mystery, then all we're going to do is give content. And the content on its own is not going to bring our people to living their faith in a dynamic way. Karl Rahner said, and this is back in the 1960s sometime, he said the Christian of the future is either going to be a mystic or not at all. Can you hear that? That means that the Christian of the future is either going to be initiated into the sacred mysteries or not at all. If you want to know where the real challenge of the church is today, my humble belief is that we have not initiated our people into the sacred mysteries. And therefore, we are asking our people to live what they don't have the depth of commitment to be able to sustain. Because if you're not initiated into the sacred mystery, then what you're living is a dead morality. That's all you're living. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. But why? And you know why? Except you're initiated, there's no why. Now, if you're initiated into the sacred mysteries, if you come to this encounter with Jesus Christ, if Christ's life is animating you and becoming stronger and stronger inside of you and growing daily, building you up to the fullness of maturity that you're being called to, then you have a why for what you're called to live. And then you have a why for what you're being asked. And then you have a why for why you pray every day. You have a why for why you make sacrifice. You have a why for why you love and why you forgive when you don't want to. You have a why for why you live a moral code. You have a why for why you live by your conscience. Everybody with me? You sure? Okay. This to me is, now we're into the pivotal shift here, okay? Playing with your minds. This shift is not a shift in kind. This is a shift in approach. This is a shift in method. But it's not just a shift in method. It's a shift in the objective of the lesson. The objective of the lesson. Because the objective of your lesson plan should be something to do with initiation. As opposed to, and the student will learn about values, they will learn about virtues, and they learn about conscience. At the end, you could tick all three boxes because you've taught them about values, about virtues, and about conscience. Let me go to the next thing that we're teaching now. As opposed to, at the end of this lesson, the students would have been initiated into an understanding of values, virtues, and conscience that flows out of their relationship with God. As an outflow of their relationship with God. Can you see the difference? Huh? Because you start by talking about their relationship with God, or you start from a biblical parable with Lectio, or you start from the examine of conscience, where people through a prayer experience start examining their conscience and start to come to consciousness about their values, their virtues, and conscience. The different starting places. We're already well into our fourth level of vocation, which is conscience. And we're going to look at a little clip by Robert Barron on conscience and morality.
I'm a great fan of the Elijah stories, which can be found in the first book of Kings. I often tell people, if you're interested in the Bible, you want to get into it for the first time, begin with those stories about Elijah. They're very interesting and kind of adventurous. And Elijah is a figure whose name gives away the game. Elijah is an anglicization of Eliyahu in Hebrew. El means God, Yahu means Yahweh. Yahweh is my God. That's who Elijah is. He's someone who's very clear on his ultimate value, which is Yahweh. I've often said you can tell an awful lot about a person by what they worship. Worship just means worthship. That's where the word comes from. What's of highest worth to you? What's of highest value? So if your family is of highest value, you're a family man, you're a family woman. If your business is most important to you, you're a company man. You know, if sex is most important to you, you're a playboy or a playgirl. Pleasure is the most important thing, you're a good time Charlie. I mean, you can name somebody from what they worship. Elijah is eminently clear about whom he worships. It's Yahweh. And therefore, everything else in his life flows from that. Everything he thinks, everything he does. Think, for example, we are introduced to Elijah when he confronts King Ahab, who had gone over to the worship of false gods. So, of course, the man of God is going to stand athwart that move. That's why Queen Jezebel, Ahab's wife, goes after Elijah and chases him. He runs away from her and he comes, the Bible tells us, to Horeb, the mountain of God. And now this famous scene unfolds. Elijah's there on Mount Sinai, the mountain of God, and it says, the Lord will be passing by. And then there followed a great earthquake. There followed a mighty wind that shattered the rocks. There followed a great fire. By the way, three things that were on Mount Sinai when Moses was there. So three classical signs of God's presence. But the Lord is not in the earthquake or the wind or the fire. Then Elijah hears a tiny whispering voice, and he covers his head with his prophet's mantle and he goes out to listen because the Lord is in that little voice. Right? Beautiful scene, very lyrical. What's it getting at? I think it's getting at conscience. What's the tiny whispering voice? It's that voice that we all recognize, that tells us right from wrong, that rewards us in this absolutely unique way when we've done something that's generous and kind and godly, and that punishes us in that absolutely unique way when we've done something that runs counter to God's will. Cardinal Newman, one of my great heroes, referred to the conscience as the aboriginal vicar of Christ in the soul. So Newman reverenced the Pope as the vicar of Christ, but he said there's a more original vicar of Christ in the soul, a representative of Christ, namely the voice of the conscience. Now, I know, we're all post-Freudians. We tend to say, well, conscience, that's just the internalized voice of your father, that's the inherited prejudice of your society, that's all your hang-ups, etc., etc. Well, say that all you want. And those things are real, I get all that. But say it all you want. You cannot reduce the conscience to those things. There's something that is just so powerful and clear and integral about it that we know it's not just a matter of hang-ups and repressions or internalized voices of the Father. There's something about the conscience that presses upon us with enormous power. Let me get at it too, and I'm using Newman here as an inspiration, by way of contrast. So I write an article every week. That's part of my job. And I kind of have a sense, having written things for many, many years, that's a good one. That article was good. I've got an inner sense that tells me, yeah, that article it's good, it's clear, it's interesting, etc. I've also got a pretty clear sense when an article isn't so good. I'll say, well, that one was, it's okay, but it's not really up to par. Or that's really a second-rate article. Now, I know that feeling, and I know the positive quality of that feeling. I also know the negative quality of that feeling. My point is, it's not like the conscience. What I feel when I say, yeah, I've written a good article, it's good, it's a good feeling. It's not like the feeling that I get from doing something morally right. Or the feeling I get from writing a bad article. It's bad, but it's not like the feeling of conscience when I've done something morally wrong. We'd use the word shame there. You know, I'm ashamed when I do something that is cruel or unjust or manipulative or disrespectful. I feel ashamed of that. I don't feel ashamed when I write a bad article. I feel bad about it. I regret it, you might say, but I don't feel ashamed. And see, here's Cardinal Newman's point. We call the conscience a voice. I don't call that sensibility about the article a voice. The voice of my literary sensibility told me. I don't say that. But I do say the voice of my conscience told me that's the right thing to do, or that was a bad thing to do. Now, why? Why? Because the conscience places us in the presence of someone that we love. That when you are rewarded by your conscience, it's the feeling you get when you've pleased someone that you love. When you are punished by your conscience, it's the feeling you get when you have hurt or disappointed someone that you love. You see, that's why the conscience is the aboriginal vicar of Christ in the soul. It's the contact we have, if you want, with the personal God who rewards us and who chides us when we're less than what we should be. Go back to Elijah now. Eliyahu, the man of God. Elijah was ordered to God. His whole life was about God. Everything else fell in place around that. The point of that story from 1 Kings is Elijah had the great grace to be able to hear that little voice. See, the problem is the conscience can be drowned out. The conscience can be ignored. We can look the other way because there are 1,000 voices competing for our attention. 1,000 voices, and they're more like earthquakes and fire and wind. They're more extraordinary. And they call out to us, live this way, do this, don't do that. Think of a kid coming of age now in our culture being told in a million ways, here's what you should do, here's the life you should lead, follow this person. Do you have the capacity, amidst all those voices, to hear that tiny whispering voice? Because that's the one you got to pay attention to. The Lord said, it profits a man nothing to gain the whole world and lose his soul. You know, there are voices that are calling out to young people that might actually promise them and even deliver to them the whole world. All the pleasure and money and power and so on they want. But how tragic if you follow those voices, but in the process lose your soul, which means lose what your conscience is telling you. So I would urge, especially young people listening to this video, is think of that scene of the prophet Elijah on God's holy mountain as he hears that one voice. That's the one you need to follow.
I could easily have given a similar teaching on conscience to you, correct? Yeah? I chose not to show you that you can, in your class, pull up a short video to tackle a subject from an expert and then have conversation around it as another mode of learning. That you don't have to teach everything, but you have to get the best experts into your classroom so that the best experts are teaching your children. Because what he does is not just give the content, but he gives this sense of the relationship and why the conscience regulates the relationship. Because if we listen to our conscience, what we do is we open ourselves up to God. We don't listen. What we do is we actually stop that one voice. We stop that one voice. And when we stop listening to that one voice, we stop listening to God. Correct? So the tradition has said that the voice of conscience is the voice of God. That's how it is spoken about it. He talks about Elijah being called by that voice. Vocare is to be called out from, to be called to. And that's why I put conscience within vocation. Because the place where we connect in an everyday sense with God and his vocation is through our conscience. Can you see that now? Yeah? So if you think now, your primary vocation, whatever that might be to you, your gift that you're supposed to use for the building up of the body of Christ and the unity of Christ, at the third level, which is your state of life and your profession, how do we keep alignment between these three levels and our vocation? Through our conscience. Through our conscience. Because when we are given an opportunity to use a gift that is really our gift to give, and we start saying, I'm too tired today, so I really into that, no? Is your conscience should prod you to say, but didn't I ask? Like when I was going up that hill, it was so easy that day because I had things pressing on me in the office that I needed to get back to. And when he said it, it was that deep inner voice that said, but this is what I asked, that allowed me to say, oh, and do what was being asked. So I want you to see conscience now as the faculty that we have received that connects us with our vocation at all the levels, at all of our levels. We live by our conscience, we live by God. We live by our conscience, we are constantly responding to what God is asking us. I want you to think about the conscience knocks at us many, 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 many times every day. If we are conscious of it. Can you see that? Can you see that? A way of talking about conscience is, you know, the angel on one shoulder and the little devil on the next shoulder. You know what I'm talking about? Eh? And the angel saying, but you know, if you do that, it would be really amazing, you know. And the devil saying, man, you tired. You just had a long day. You need to put your foot up and relax here, man. What is you think is a matter or what? What is you gonna do? And the next the little angel saying, but you know, if you would just give them this love that they need right now, that would be just really so amazing. And isn't that your gift? Isn't that what God asked you to give? You see, this love thing is foolishness, you know. The man, them only using you as a doormat. You think any of them really understand you? You think them care about you? Them don't care about you. Them only care about themselves. What is you going to do this? You know the voice they're talking about now? That's the voice we're talking about. We are constantly in a debate, an internal debate, and the conscience is a referee in this debate. The conscience allows the voice to be recognized. The will or the understanding comes to a recognition of the propositions to be taken or the positions to be taken, and the will then allows us to make an act towards one or the other. But it's more than one internal faculty. But it starts by being able to actually hear the voice of conscience. That's where it starts. How do we get to hear the voice of conscience more clearly every moment of every day? Anybody has an idea? Huh? You know, part of what floated up when you went to meditation was your bad conscience beating you? And you call it distraction? Ha ha ha, ouch, ouch. True or not true? Think back of what you call distraction. Wasn't some of that your bad conscience beating you? Stupidness or things you should have been doing or bad things you did that start rising up? So how do we listen to conscience? I would propose to you, if you did Christian meditation every day and you did the examine every night, I would propose to you, you would hear that still voice clearer and clearer over the next week, the next month, the next half year, the next year. You would be in a better place to actually hear that voice of conscience. These two ancient prayers, together with Lectio Divina, because Lectio Divina gives us a content. That's when we meditate on what Jesus would have done in a situation. That gives us a content for our conscience. Christian meditation allows a space for the conscience to rise. And the examine allows us a faculty of reflecting on our conscience and on our consciousness, so that in that reflection, we actually start to hear. When you do the examine, if you, whatever is the thing that you bring for attention up to the top and you meditate on it, that the next time you come to that, you actually start to see it before you get into the full rhythm that you normally would get into. You get warning signals earlier than you did before. You start getting the conscience speaking before you jump into full flight with whatever that foolishness you would normally do. Everybody's good? All human beings have conscience. All. You know, one of the things before the world came together with communications, every tribe, every village, and every society had taboos around certain things. Around stealing, around sex, around birth, around death, around violence, around how you treated each other. Every society had taboos around these things. This is long before Christianity was on the scene. And they regulated certain parts of human life. Why did they regulate it? And the thing is that all societies had a common core of things that they would regulate. All societies had this common core. How is that? Somebody wrote a book and passed it around to each one. They had no books in those days. They were not in contact with each other. They didn't develop it in common. It either came from deep inside the human spirit, or it was just fluke and coincidence. Why do societies regulate certain human things and behaviors and not others? Well, and why is there a common core when there was no contact and conversation? That's because it comes from deep inside, not from outside. So all human beings have conscience. There are some people whose conscience are impaired. There's some people. Now, and that's a very small percentage who actually cannot hear their conscience. They are sociopaths. This is a medical condition where they literally cannot hear the voice of conscience. They literally cannot hear it. And those are serial murderers, and they do really bad things because there's no conscience speaking to them. That's different. Okay, that's a medical condition. The rest of humanity, we all have conscience. But many people dumb their conscience down. They choose not to listen and choose to put up all kinds of filters around it. Is this helpful now? Yes. So the question is, hold a second. The question is, can you strengthen your conscience? Can you get some muscle building for conscience? And the best muscle building for conscience I know is the examine. It's the examine. If you do the examine every night and you reflect on your entire day, you're not just reflecting on your conscience, but you're strengthening your consciousness. Your consciousness sees the move coming 2 steps away. Your conscience informs you of how you should respond or not in that situation. But consciousness starts by seeing it coming at you. You understand the difference? Eh? When, everybody has at least one area in their life where they are totally they really need God's mercy and help. If you think that is not so, I'll come to your table and we'll do it publicly until we find the area. But I guarantee you I can find it. I guarantee you that. Anybody would like to doubt me? Okay, good. I thought so. Now, every human person has at least one area of their life where they know that they are not in control, where they are powerless, where once you get into that, it's like if your brain is shut down. You all know what I'm talking about? You sure? Because I could help you if you need, huh? Okay. When we do the examine, what happens is we develop both conscience and strengthen conscience to help us to make the decision, or at least to hear the voice of God clearer. But we develop consciousness because we also develop the understanding and the will that we can translate that voice into an action that is actually consistent with my value system. Are you with me now? So, and that's why I'm proposing the examine, because the examine isn't about what I did wrong. It is about the consciousness of where God was in my day. The consciousness of the encounters that I've had. That's the gratitude. The consciousness of how those encounters have led me along this day. That's my gratitude. Then the consciousness of how I have responded. And then the invitation of the Spirit as we delve into one thing where I need more awareness. And the step by step, it strengthens both the capacity to hear the voice of conscience, the understanding and the will to act, and the consciousness to see it coming 2 steps before. Everybody's with me on this? Everybody's good? I see this as an essential part of vocation, because it is this that ties vocation to a living reality. When we leave church and we reach to home, it is our conscience that takes the message of the gospel we received in church and translates it into certain kinds of actions at home. So we have this. If you go down 2 slides for me. Deep within their conscience, men and women discover a law which they have not laid upon themselves and which they must obey. Its voice ever calling them to love and to do what is good and to avoid evil, tells them inward at the right moment, do this, shun that, for they have in their hearts a law inscribed by God. That's from the Second Vatican Council. This is the teaching of the church. I want to go on to show you how the church holds conscience. If you go to the next one for me. And to the next one. This one comes from John Paul II, his famous book, Crossing the Threshold of Hope. He says, in an answer that echoes the teaching of the fathers and the theological tradition from St. Thomas Aquinas to John Henry Newman, the Council merely reaffirms what has always been the Church's conviction. The position of St. Thomas is, in fact, well known. He is so consistent in his respect for conscience that he maintains that it is wrong for one to make an act of faith in Christ if in one's conscience one is convicted, however absurdly, that it is wrong to carry out such an act. If a man is admonished by his conscience, even if an erroneous conscience, but one whose voice appears to him as unquestionably true, he must always listen to it. What is not permissible is that he culpably indulges in error without trying to reach the truth. What the Pope is saying is that we hold conscience so important that if, even in a matter that is of religious assent, it is against your conscience, even if your conscience is erroneous, you have to follow your conscience. It is that significant, that serious. Everybody's good now? Okay. So, on this fourth level of conscience, what we now have is we've tied now the three top levels back to, this is where the rubber and the road start to meet. This is where the rubber and the road start to meet. The first level is about how God sees me at the core. The second level is the gifts he's given me to give. The third level is my life state and my profession. Now, it's about how God calls me to live these other three levels out. And how he calls me every moment of every day to live these other three levels out. Everybody's good with this? We have two people who would like to share something. We have 5 minutes. So I'll come to Gloria first. And then our sister over there has been trying to get my attention for a little while too.
Yeah, just to talk about the examen. After my first 8-day retreat, Sister Una exposed me to this examen. At that point, I was bringing up 5 children and busy. So I like to develop little things that suit my lifestyle. So I found a way to do the examen. I found it very helpful. This does not mean that I don't mess up. I would go in, I'd wait until everybody went to bed, and I went into the bathroom, which had a large mirror, and I would stand up in front of the mirror, and I would look at myself, and I would say, Gloria, how you did today, Gail? I used a little method. If I could look at myself straight in my face, in my eyes, I said, okay, it wasn't too bad. And you know, I say, well, so-and-so went wrong. And then I would know, well, yes. And that has been very helpful for me in getting up next morning and dealing with. So the examen, I find, is a very useful tool. And these days, as I live through this period of my life, I do it in another way. I don't go in front of the mirror, but I sit in the chair late at night, and I kind of center myself, and I say, okay, Lord, today was kind of hard, eh? I didn't know how I'm at. So.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Thank you. Wonderful witness and testimony.
I would like, good morning to everybody. I would like to find out what about the conscience of those people, the ISIS regime, who, I have seen a picture just recently, 2 nights ago, who taking the babies as early as ever, take the babies, bring them up, 2-3 years, give them guns, and then they are teaching them through, with things on their head, earphones, and they're teaching them this issue of killing, get rid of, and things of that nature. What sort of conscience does this child have? And when like one of them, when they were 7 years, they decided they wanted to do the wrong thing.
Father, on a similar score, there's something that also bothers me. The Aztec civilization, as most of us would be aware, practiced collective butchery on a grand scale, in that when they went to war and they would capture hundreds of their enemies, they would take them up to this pyramid in the middle of Mexico City, and the priest would hold them down, and then one priest would take a knife and slash open the person's chest and pull out the beaten heart, right, and offer it up to their gods. And this thing, was going on a massive scale for hundreds of years. What about somebody growing up in a society like that? And also people growing up in societies like the Huns, Attila the Hun, and these other people who over the centuries have practiced what I call collective butchery. What about somebody growing up in a society like that?
Great question. What about somebody growing up in a society where money becomes more important than people, and where material wealth is the be-all and end-all of living? What about somebody growing up in a society where they're practicing the creed of 50 Cent, get rich or die trying? What about somebody growing up in a society where they're taught that sexual pleasure is the highest form of human good, and that everyone has a right to as much sexual pleasure as they can have possibly? What about somebody growing up in that kind of society too? What about somebody growing up in a society where people, because of the color of their skin, are treated inferiorly, as opposed to people who, because of the color of their skin, are treated as superior? What about people growing up in that kind of society? Okay, so I just want to take it from the Aztecs and bring it home, because it's nice to talk about them, but let me talk about we. Okay? Everybody hearing me now, eh? All of a sudden? Okay, good. Conscience, so Freud would make a distinction between the ego, the superego, and the conscience. The superego is the collective understandings and agreements of the society. And in these collective understandings and agreements, it blinds people to rightness and wrongness, as it points people to a certain evaluation of what is right and what is wrong. And so you have to, I wasn't going to go down into the psychology of conscience, but a lot of work has been done on this. So there are these collective agreements or understandings that we have that actually blind us to right and wrong. But Dietrich Bonhoeffer, living in Germany, was a consistent voice of protest against what was happening. Martin Luther King, living in America, was a consistent voice of protest against what was happening. Mahatma Gandhi, living in India, Nelson Mandela, living in South Africa. What I'm saying is that even when the whole society has come to a collective agreement that ultimately is against conscience, there are people whose conscience and consciousness rise above this society and point the way back to God. We call these people prophets, and we usually kill them. We usually do. Why do we kill? Because they're saying something that goes against what we actually think we believe. And that's why we try to kill them. But civilizations transform because one person sees a truth and speaks to that truth, and then that person becomes a voice of conscience speaking to the people. You know that Archbishop Pantin of happy memory was the voice of conscience of this nation far too often? You all know that? When the whole society was going mad in one direction or the next, in his own unique, jovial style, he would make two jokes, say something and everybody understood exactly what the man was saying? Correct? So we've experienced one person whose voice of conscience has challenged the prevailing thinking of our nation. Yeah? Good. Conscience is a very important part of vocation. Because as the text says, God calls us through our conscience. That's why I put it into the vocation piece. Because it is the most immediate way in which God calls us. Every moment of every day, God is calling you through your conscience. Can you hear that? Huh? Every moment of every day, God is calling you through your conscience. That's vocation. That's vocare. He's calling you out from the foolishness you're about to do and to becoming his son and his daughter. Everybody's good? Wow. Take a deep breath now. That was big stuff, you know. Now, that was much harder stuff than yesterday, not so? A lot more to digest, but we worked at it using different things. So now we're bang on time. We're going to take our break and come back bang on time at 11 so that we can continue to the next big topic we have today, which is authentic, integral human development, which is the vocation of the church. Have a great break.